Welcome to Calls to Greatness History, produced by Actors Theater of South Carolina and paid in part by a grant from South Carolina Humanities. I am Chris Weatherhead, Artistic Director of the company. We will share with you some turning points in American history, from the War for American Independence to the mid-20th century, from many who overcame all odds and risked everything to achieve their highest level of potential. Enjoy Calls to Greatness.
There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at flood leads on to fortune. For Virginia attorney Patrick Henry, that tide crested on March the 23rd, 1775. With rebellion in the air, the Second Virginia Convention met at St. John's Church in Richmond. Delegates contentiously debated the proper response to the king's increasingly hostile actions. Henry, a persuasive orator, stood and addressed a veritable who's who of future revolutionary leaders: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and 5 other signers of the Declaration of Independence. Let's hear his words.
No man thinks more highly than I do of the patriotism of the worthy gentlemen who have just addressed this house. But different men often may see the same subject in different lights, and should I hold back my opinion at this time, I should consider myself as guilty of a treasonous act toward my country and an act of disloyalty toward the majesty of heaven, whom I revere above all. This is not the part of wise men engaged in an arduous and glorious struggle for liberty. We do not want to be part of those men who, having eyes, see not, and having ears, hear not. For my part, whatever the cost, in anguish of spirit, I want to know the whole truth. I want to know the worst. Now, I would wish to know from those gentlemen what they have seen in the conduct of the British ministry which gives them cause to hope. Is it the insidious smile with which they receive our petitions? Ask yourselves how this gracious reception compares with these warlike preparations that have covered our waters and darken our lands. These are the implements of warfare and subjugation. Now, what have we to oppose these preparations? Well, shall we try argument? We've been trying that for 10 more years. And we have petitions, we have supplicated, we have prostrated ourselves, and we have been spurned with contempt from the foot of the throne. We must fight. They tell us we are weak. But when shall we be stronger? Will it be the next week? Or next year? Or will it be when we are totally disarmed and bound hand and foot by our enemies, and with a British guard stationed in every house? We are not weak if we make proper use of the force that the God of nature has put into our power. We shall not fight our battles alone. There is a God of justice who oversees the destinies of nations, that will raise up friends to fight alongside us. And The battle is not to the strong alone. It is to the active and the brave. Our chains are already forged. You can hear them clanking on the plains of Boston. Now, gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The next gale that sweeps in from the north will bring to our ears the sound of clashing arms. Our brothers are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that you wish? What is it that you would have? Is life so dear and peace so sweet to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death.
Henry's eloquent address moved the pros present to begin preparing Virginia for war. Lord Dunmore, the royal governor, reacted by hiding essential gunpowder from his would-be revolutionaries. Dunmore is little remembered, but the words of Patrick Henry still ring out.
John Featherston is not a name familiar to most Americans, but he was one of many unsung heroes in our history. He was a free African American who was one of 70 seamen and Marines aboard the ship Defense under Captain Simon Tufts in the War for American Independence. In 1775, this vessel defended Charleston Harbor against the British ships the Tamar and the Cherokee in what was known as the Hog Island Channel action. You are about to meet John Featherston. It is hoped that through what you hear, he will receive his rightful recognition in America's history.
I was a free man before the Revolution. I am an American and a Navy man. I fought in the very first naval battle of the American Revolution in the Charleston Harbor. 2 other Americans of African descent served with me, George Cooper and Stephen Bond. We served on the American schooner Defense under Captain Simon Tufts. The British had plied their trade with me, trying to convince me that I would be better off with them, threatening terrors upon me if I did not join them. I felt I might have a better chance at greater freedom in a new country that many folks were talking about in the taverns, but I chose the Patriots and my love for the sea. In the fall of 1775, we were attacked by the British. Now, in October, we feared that redcoats would attack the Cooper River waterfront and our city. The provincial Congress saw the need to create a navy and map out a plan to defend Charleston from the British, to block them any way possible. William Drayton and Thomas Hayward were to head a mission to block the channel of Hog Creek by scuttling 4 old ships. Scuttling means sinking them. It was to block the British from entering our harbor. They armed our schooner. We trained hard to defend the harbor. They added soldiers from South Carolina, 1st and 2nd regiments to help us. The Congress ordered Colonel William Moultrie to choose 35 of us to serve as Marines on the schooner. Our mission was to tow the 4 hulks to the right place and sink them in the channel without being attacked. We sailed under the cover of fog that morning. 70 seamen and Marines, 2 9-pound guns, 6 6-pounders, and 2 4-pounders. William Henry Drayton sailed with us to supervise our mission. While we were towing the hulks, 2 British ships approached. One of them caught the wind and was coming on fast. They fired 6 shots. We were hit 3 times. Damage was small, but we returned with our heaviest 9-pounders. We saw 2 shots go through the enemy's rigging. But they were swiftly on course to set one of our hulks on fire. We were able to hurry and sink the other 3 hulks and escape. When we anchored at the harbors at the end of the docks, at the end of Market Street, a whole crowd of folks had gathered to watch the battle and greeted us with cheers. I must say, it was the happiest day of my life. However, on our run the next day, the British followed again and fired 130 shots at our ship. Thankfully, the wind was with us that day, and they fell short all around us as we moved quickly in the harbor. By a miracle, no one was harmed. 2 days later, William Henry Drayton wrote to the Council of Safety that reads, "The Hog Island Channel battle was the actual commencement of hostilities by the British and an event at the highest moment to the southern part of the United Colonies." But the matter of getting our wages was a problem. I served on that ship for 7 months, only received 2 months' pay. Every time we asked for wages, Captain Tuff says, "You must ask Governor Rutledge, for I have no more wages from the government to give you." I heard of a position serving under Captain Thomas Grimble, a true hero and leader of Charleston's District Regiment, 6th Independent Artillery Company. I jumped at it. I became one of 100 men in charge of 12 guns at the fort. Now, I heard later that the defense was out capturing prize ships for the Patriots, doing very well, when they were suddenly captured by the British. They were sent to New York Harbor, where many of my mates were put on prison ships. Now, I will spare you what happened on those. So, I was mightily glad I stayed in Charleston. I served in the skirmishes at Fort Moultrie, manning those guns, shooting at British ships until they got tired and gave up. We were a small company, but we were proud and fought hard.
The vast contributions of women in the American Revolution can never be measured due to the lack of historical source material, and some scholars are dubious that a patriotic teenage girl could have risked her life as a spy to fight for our independence. However, there are affidavits signed by her family members of the great story.
During the war, I was working on the family farm. I would hoe and plant, ride the land, fix posts, do anything needing done. Because my father was ill, he needed me. He was a very great patriot and was heartsick he could not fight the British in the war. I wished I were a man so I could go and fight in his place, but as a girl, I could only dream of such adventures. But one rainy day, I was cleaning horse stalls when I heard the pounding of hooves coming from the east. So I hurried to the tavern to peek in and listen and tell my father. Through the shoulders of the men, I saw the messenger. He said he had a secret message to be delivered to the camp of General Thomas Sumter. He then asked who would go. Silence. The messenger became angry. He said, "This is a matter of life and death to our nation. Is there none among you to take the message? We have no one who knows the way. I could not help myself. Shouting through the open window, I said, I know the way, sir. I will go. The tavern group turned and commenced to laugh at me. Climbing through the window, I said, Sir, they will not be suspicious of a girl. And I can say I'm going to my uncle's farm. It is true. Can ride as well as anyone here. Let anyone deny that. So he must have thought I made sense. So he took me to the general. General Green told me of what horrors could befall me if I was caught and found a spy. Oh, things I blush to say. I had heard tales of such torture, but in spite of a deep fear that brushed close to my soul, I simply pushed the prospect out of my mind. I knew the way. I knew my horse was in fine health, and I begged to serve my country. The general said, You know the way that well? You can ride in the dark of night? Yes, I said, and I have friends I can water my horse with. He gave me the letter, but he made me learn the message by heart. He said, Beware, this is for no one but General Sumter himself. He is a formidable man, with a high-collar uniform, a piercing gaze, and a long, thin nose. It was several hours on the near darkness when I was traveling through pathways I knew best. Then I crossed the Watery River at Camden Ferry, headed for the hills of Santee, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, appeared a young loyalist scout shoving a bayonet near my horse. Oh, without even seeing my face, he yells, You are my prisoner! On whose authority am I detained? Well, he was surprised to see that I was a girl, and shocked to see that I was so young. He was smitten with me, I reckon. So he let go of my bridle. But an older scout who was with him grabbed my reins and ordered me to dismount. I said, Sir, I am only on my way to visit my uncle. There was an empty cabin near the edge of the swamp, and the older gentleman ordered me to go in. He told the young scout to guard me. Thanks to Providence, he stayed outside the door. You see, I knew I must do something quick. So I took out the letter, made sure I had the message clear, tore it into many pieces, and I ate it. There was nothing left to do. The matron and her daughter came to search my clothing. They were actually kind as they could be. After they reported finding nothing on me, I dried my tears. And I became angry. I said, Is this the way all young women are treated when on a mission of mercy for a dying father? The young scout was full of apology, and the older scout also offering apology. They took me to the soldier holding my horse. The young scout was ordered to take me to my uncle's, but instead he took me to the home of the loyalist matron, where they said I could stay the night. I waited until the young scout had returned to Lord Rowden's camp, and I jumped out the window onto my horse and rode like the wind. I made it to General Sumter's camp and asked a soldier who did not believe that a girl could have a message for the general, but with the eyes of many soldiers on me, he took me to the general. I gave General Sumter a message. Quickly join General Francis Marion at Camden Ferry to stop Lord Rowden from crossing the Congaree. He believed me and gave the orders. I will never forget the kindness the matron showed me. After the war was over, I went to visit her with my husband. Oh, I even saw the young scout who shoved a bayonet at my horse. You know, he said that he never was a good loyalist anyway and was glad the way the war turned out. The matron, Mrs. Buxton, she smiled and said, "The ways of God are mysterious." Indeed, that young man, some years later, had a son who grew up and married my daughter. Oh, I was so glad that I was able to fight in the war.
In 1735, the young Henry Felder arrived from Switzerland to South Carolina. He settled with his parents in the wilderness of the colony. They both died soon after, but he survived and built a life as a successful merchant and farmer. He never believed in slavery and was passionate about all living free. The British became ever increasingly corrupt and cruel until he rebelled against the king along with many others. He gathered a militia with his neighbors to fight for freedom and independence in America. He is my sixth great-grandfather, so I want to share his story with you. In 1765, the British recruited all of us in America to fight the French and the Indians. And when we won the war for them, they got the bright idea to tax us, to pay for it. That was wrong. So, in 1775, me and my militias had to ride hard and shoot straight to keep them off the coast of South Carolina. You see, Francis Marion recruited all of us, along with William Moultrie, to pick off those British when they tried to come across at low tide to take the fort on Sullivan's Island. Well, they lost so many men, they had to turn their little ships around and hightail it back to London, to Lord North, and leave us alone. You see, I realized that I was willing to die for my land. I came here from Bern, Switzerland, with my family in 1735, and there we were stonemasons, but here we became warriors. There, my tools were changed. I had the tools now of my tomahawk and my hunting sword. Nice, yes. Well, you see, the rice kings in the Low Country, they told us that we would be the new owners of 200 acres of land in the Orangeburg district, but someone forgot to inform the brave Cherokee of the change of ownership. So we had to fight hard to keep this land, and we had to become soldiers. Now, look, I will tell you what men in war will do. In 1760s, the British took and held hostage 22 Cherokee chiefs. And then there was a revenge war party raid by some Cherokee warriors on the settlers, and they burned the houses and the crops, and they killed the weak and sold the strong into slavery, just as they had always done to the Catawba and the Creek tribes. So you see, we had to fight for 30 years to keep this land. Now, for years, when I was foreman of the grand jury in the Orangeburg district, well, I watched years of corrupt British judges make many false judicial decisions, and finally, I would ask them just treat the colonials with fairness. But the more I asked, the worse they insulted and injured us. And at last, after years of pain of being under their corrupt thumbs, I wrote a declaration of separation from the British king. Well, the moment I did that, there was a target on my back. They said they would come after us with violence. Well, they had the mightiest army in the world, and I said, let them come. Let them come. So, me and my militias, we rode all over this state and fighting, and even my 7 sons joined us. But then, these Tory thugs, they came and burned out our farm. They killed the livestock, and they tried to destroy me and my family. And, well, they captured my son, who was on a secret mission for William Washington, and when he tried to escape by jumping in the river, they shot him in the back. I did not think that I could go on. But then, to honor him, we rebuilt, and we overcame, and we rode out again and again, and we fought them with everything we had. We fought them in the fields, in the forest, on the streams, on the bridges, where we would ambush them with the gunpowder that I was authorized to manufacture. But then they came again, and they wanted to know where that gunpowder was hidden, you see? And they tried, but we drove them off. Then they tricked me. Yeah. They rode as if they were giving up and riding away, but I told my sons to go and ambush them, but they circled back. And when they got here, I was alone with only my brave wife and my steadfast servant, and, well, I killed 15 of them. Then they threw the torches on the roof, and the flames got so bad I had to send the women out to safety. I knew it was me they wanted. And then finally, I had to try to escape by leaping through the window, and with the fire at my back and the shots, well, I fell into the dirt of the yard. It took me 2 days to die. So, you see, my dream of being free died for me that day, but not for my country, or not for my family, and not for each one of you. So, do not be surprised if you encounter me looking for the brave ones who will keep liberty in this country. Oh, and take care of yourself, huh?
A great tragedy is the death of a young soldier from Charleston, South Carolina, John Lawrence, who spent every waking moment when not fighting the British in the American War for Independence, trying to convince leaders to end slavery. As a valuable aide to George Washington, he fought in 4 major battles and was wounded in all of them. He pressured Congress to give him a regiment of 5,000 black slave troops to fight for their freedom along with him and the Patriots. He desperately wanted to end slavery before the end of the war. But resistance was great. He constantly looked for help, and he prayed for guidance.
Lord, what do you want me to do? My father, his friends, and others, I see the way they look at me when I begin to speak of these things. I want to earn the respect of men, and I want to be liked. But this vision that you have given to me, it is like a fire in my brain. It never stops. All I say makes perfect sense to me. But then I am crushed by this mountain of excuses and lies. What I see for this new nation requires that all must be free. The achievements possible in such a land would be truly without limit. But then new enemies appear every day. The treachery of this world overwhelms me.
Sorry, Colonel, sir.
This is an outrage! There are movements in many colonies to end slavery. Rhode Island, Vermont, Virginia, and many here in South Carolina heartily agree with me. How can these stubborn men be so blind?
I'm sorry, Colonel, sir.
I will not. I cannot let these political elites impose their will to crush my dreams and your God-given right to liberty. I will force them. I will force each and every...
Colonel, with what weapons will you force their approval of your plan?
You mock me too, eh? The reward of failure is always contempt.
No, Colonel. That book you gave me by that man Sir Walter Raleigh, I will not quote, "The victory lies in the struggle, not the city won." Sir, your struggles come from the deep urges we have in our hearts since the beginning of the world. The fear these men feel is the fear of the stranger, the other, and the different. It often makes humans want to destroy what is not known, sir. Difference is danger, Colonel. Sometimes for good reason, sometimes not.
Please, call me John.
No, I am more comfortable addressing you as Colonel, sir. Please allow me this indulgence.
As you say, Philip.
And Colonel, the other, we all feel it, see it. That face coming out of the dark into the campfire. If it's close enough to be lit, it's close enough to be dangerous, sir. Your loss today is a painful wound, but in every trials and arms, you have endured at least one wound and survived. And you will heal from this as well. You have convinced many, and you must be grateful for that.
Perhaps. I agree with Governor Jefferson's prescription for the health of freedom, that from time to time the tree of liberty must be manured with the blood of tyrants and patriots. I promise you, Philip, I will never stop my prayers, my energy, and my efforts to cleanse us of this deadly bondage. We are all trapped in its chains.
Yes, accepting for one true thing. If we all choose, we are free in our minds, John.
It is a sad reality that many of the brave acts of human kindness and true heroism of enslaved people during the American Revolution have not been recorded in our history. However, the late historian and scholar Michael Scoggins sent us a wonderful story of a very generous-hearted woman and her sons who risked their lives during that war to save a helpless man. Please, hear their story.
You know, I fought in the war for independence. My sons did too, but I did not plan to. And I fought in the ways you would not expect for a slave woman. It was while I was caring for my Mr. Hugh Kane, a good but sickly, Irish, Christian man, Presbyterian. God rest his soul. He was a proud patriot, fighting with all 4 of his sons in the war. His wife was gone visiting. This was 1780, and the British had done their worst in Charlestown. The men of that man Cornwallis were raging all over the countryside, bringing a great load of terror. Now, I will not call him Lord Cornwallis, as I have but one Lord, and he could never be that red-coat weasel sent to destroy everyone who wanted freedom. Mr. Kane spoke often of us being free one day if we could just get the load of taxes up off our colony. Master Kane was a caring man. He helped me raise my boys to follow Christ and gave us many things I know others did not get. He taught us to read the Bible. Said the Lord would find a way to give us all a better life if we could just get our liberty from the corrupt magistrates of the king. You know, he even told us where his secret hiding place was for his gold. Said he was saving it for when we could all have a new country. Imagine that. Well, one day, we was in the barn working, and Mr. Hugh heard horses coming. He told us to run and go hide in the woods. Said if they was the king's men, they might come grab us and press us and makes us work for them. So he gave my boys the 2 pistols out the barn, and we ran on out to the woods to hide. They were loyalists, all right. And after a bit of talk, the leader shouted to Mr. Hugh to show him where he had hid his gold. Well, Mr. Hugh shouted, there was no gold. They commenced to name him a liar. They grabbed him and dragged him to the walnut tree. They put a rope over his head and put him in a cart with a mule just held up high enough to jerk him on his toes. He was choking bad. My eldest boy wanted to save him, and I got an idea from General Marion, who was famous for coming out the woods to save a day. I whispered to my eldest son to go around to the right, and for my other son to take the left. And on my signal, they were to shout as if to make an attack and discharge their weapons. Now, I knew this could go very wrong, but I could not sit by and watch them hang my Mr. Hugh. I was praying these Tories was just a cowardly lot. But again, they shouted, "Where's your gold, you limey traitor?" And Mr. Hugh said, "I sent it to the Patriots. Take me to trial and get this rope off my neck." I was afraid that they'd go too far in their anger. So I gave a signal and used my deepest voice to sound like a militia leader calling, "Damn king's puppets, come on, men!" My boys discharged their weapons and made noises in them trees. Praise God. Those men looked like a pack of mice, and they dropped him like a piece of cheese. Well, they ran for their horses, But then the mule bolted, and Mr. Hugh was left hanging. My youngest came running. He's the tallest. He grabbed Mr. Hugh, hoisted him up just enough so that he could catch a breath. We grabbed the mule to bring back the cart, and we got a stool just high enough to cut him down. We had to carry him to the house. He had stopped breathing for a bit, so we doused his face with water, and praise God, he came right soon enough. When his sons heard about this and came back, they were so glad they gave us some money. And Mr. Hugh was mighty grateful too. He thanked us often for saving his life. And you know, he went on to get well. Went to see Jesus at 92. Praise God. And you know, them Tories never found that gold.
A Catawba warrior and proud revolutionary, Peter Harris was a man with a foot in two competing cultures. Noted for their bravery, Catawba warriors were feared in colonial South Carolina. With the coming of independence, the Catawba Nation, unlike its larger, stronger rival, the Cherokee, sided with the Patriots. The Catawba were essential to Patriot victory at Fort Moultrie in 1776. And in the dark days following the fall of Charleston in 1780, the Catawba provided a base, supplies, and recruits for General Thomas Sumter. As a result, Sumter was able to organize a successful grassroots effort to resist the British. For his service in the Revolution, the state of South Carolina paid Harris a pension. His words, though, reflect the challenge of the New World Order.
My name is Peter Harris. I was a brave among many braves. We Catawba warriors have been well known as men of courage, fierce men. Before the colonists came, there were many wars my people had to fight. Many tribes and many enemies. There was much confusion. The Yamasee had joined the colonists against the Tuscarora, and hell came to the land. My grandfather fought with our Catawba tribes. Others joined this side, and then later joined that side. The Muskogee, the Yuki, the Cherokee, the Appalachee, the Westos, the Savannah River Shawnee, the Kiowa, the Congaree, and the Waxhaws. Once it ended, we Catawba chose to support the colonists here in South Carolina. So you see, my brothers and I were very used to fighting. But when the colonists chose to go against King George, it was decided that we would fight with them against the British for freedom to create a new nation. The Cherokee chose to be with the old fathers of the Redcoats. I saw many die. For many years, I made my living farming and telling stories to youth of the war. I am one of the few stalks left in the field where the tempest of the Revolution passed. I fought against the British for your sake. And the British have all disappeared, and you are all free. These hands which fought for your liberties are now open for your relief. In my youth, I bled in battle so that you may all be independent. So let not my heart in old age bleed for want of your commiseration. Senator Crafts wrote down what I told him for this petition, signed by me, Peter Harris.
Women and War, the challenge of the home front during the American Revolution, included disease, enemy action, food shortages, raids, and death. Stories and legends celebrate the bravery and sacrifices of American Revolutionary War women. But only one of these, Rebecca Bruton Mott, agreed to burn her house in order to force the British occupying it to surrender. Mott was a wealthy, well-connected woman with much to lose in the struggle for independence, yet she stood firm in her support for the Patriot cause. During the war, her husband died, Her beloved brother perished at sea. She played host to the British not once but twice. Her son-in-law was gravely wounded at Camden and later sent to Philadelphia as a prisoner of war. And yet through it all, she remained cool and clever.
Being a woman, I had no vote, but I was able to finally fight with those brave men in the War for Independence against the British. I had just survived the occupation of the British general, a vicious man in Charleston. It was 1780, and I had to hide my daughters up in the attic for months. And after months of terror, they finally let me go home to another house we had up on the river, on the Congaree. But that house was on the supply road for both armies. And suddenly they came marching into my parlor telling me that they were going to make our house their headquarters. Well, we had to leave. But months later, we heard whispers that General Greene was going to be sending help. Now, the next week, British dragoons came racing in with dispatches for Lord Rawdon, whom they expected any minute. Well, they got in, but they couldn't get out because Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, and Light Horse Harry Lee arrived with 400 soldiers. And a small cannon, too. They were all sneaking up through the underbrush. Now, the Redcoats were imprisoned in their fort by this time. 200 in all in my little house. But they were well dug in with muskets pointed out over their deep trenches all around the house. So how to force them to surrender? The next day, we Patriots were about 400 yards from the house, and they spied my roof with its dry shingles, and soon Light Horse Harry came apologizing for the need to burn my house. On the contrary, I was thrilled. Yes, good. Burn it. Burn them out if you can. I am so gratified for you to grant me the opportunity to fight for the good of my country. I will watch it burn with delight. Now then, I suddenly remembered that I had inherited some incendiary, flaming arrows. Well, I had them brought, and General Marion smiled as he looked at those arrows. He ordered Nathan Savage to shoot the arrows out of his musket. Oh, my heart sailed through the air. And then a shingle. It burst into flame. Oh, bravo! Flames then spread, and they spread down into the house. And soon it was belching out British soldiers waving a white flag of surrender. Oh, I was so glad. The Swamp Fox got his soldiers and the British to put the fire out. They saved my house. Well, we had all not eaten for days, and I was just only too happy to fix supper for everyone. Well, the war wasn't over yet, but somehow I knew it would be, and that it was gonna go our way. I was just so proud to be a part of the fight.
With a broad rebellious streak, Daniel Morgan, the old wagoner, was not a man to trifle with. He fought in the French and Indian War and later the American Revolution. His elite force, Morgan's riflemen, wore hunting shirts, and their deadly aim was feared by all they encountered. He fought in the battles of Boston, Saratoga, and the ill-fated invasion of Canada. But his greatest moment came in 1781 on an unremarkable field known as Cowpens. Commanding half of General Nathaniel Greene's Continental Army of the South, Morgan played a cat-and-mouse game with Bannister Tarleton and his British regulars. Eventually, with the rain-swollen Broad River at their backs, Morgan's men turned to face Tarleton and his mounted dragoons. Let's meet Daniel Morgan, the hero of Cowpens.
I made Brigadier General. You see, I was dispatched to that fine state of South Carolina with perhaps the best general we had. That would be General Nathaniel Greene. You know, Greene always reminded me of a snapping turtle I caught once in Virginia, about that big, and if that critter ever got his beak into your flesh, you could cut the head off, turn him into a good soup, eat the soup, and that beak would still be right there in your flesh. Well, look, we lost a lot more before we started winning. Yeah, General Greene used to say, we fight, we get beat, we rise, and fight again. Yeah, Well, unfortunately, I had to go down to South Carolina before the war started to turn. Oh, but that reminds me. You know, when I was younger, I ran a wagoning business for the British. And my cousin Daniel from Kentucky, that's Daniel Boone, he worked with me, and sometimes we'd celebrate too well, which would mean my drivers would sleep late, and I found the only way I could rouse them was by kicking them. Well, I kicked a fella one day, and he sank his teeth into my leg, and while I was hopping around and hollering and trying to kick him with the other leg, Cousin Daniel got him in a headlock and began to play a tune on his skull with an iron skillet. But then this young British officer jumped on my back and I threw him off up against the wagon wheel. Well, the Brits, they sentenced me to 500 lashes. Yeah, I survived that, barely. But then they told me they'd only given me 499. So I figured after that I owed King George one stroke. And finally, I got a chance to pay him back when I met his young hero, Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Bloody Ban Tarleton. You see, I had seen the mutilated bodies of those patriots that tried to surrender to little Banny and his British thugs, and they just rode them down and hacked them up. Yeah, well, little Banny thought he was a wolf, but he didn't know that this wolf was gonna be waiting for him. See, I learned from the brave Cherokee. They had watched the wolf packs work. So what the wolf does is the wolf will find a prey, and then he'll go after the prey. And then if the prey turns and runs away, the wolf will follow. But when the prey turns around on him, the wolf will run away. And then when the prey gets tired of that, he'll turn around and go that way, and then the wolf will follow him, and they do that back and forth until the prey begins to really get tired, and then you attack. Well, I was on the run at that time across the state of South Carolina with half the Continental Army with me, and little Banny, with his thugs, was chasing me. So, when we got to the western part of the state, I came to a place called Cowpens. Oh, pretty green grass and rolling kind of hills, and something began to burn in my brain to make a stand. Now, I knew that Banny had a whole lot more men than we did. So, the night before the battle, I went from campfire to campfire and talked to my boys. And I helped them sharpen their blades, the tomahawks, the swords, the knives, and then I talked to them about the families, and I said to them, just give me one fire, boys. That's all. Just give me one more fire. And that's it. Well, at dawn, sure enough, right after I had situated my Continental soldiers, half of them with the Kentucky sharpshooters in the middle, and then on my right flank was the boys from Georgia, the militia, and the militia from the Carolinas was on the left, and right behind the Continentals was half of the other Continental soldiers, and they were down in a depression in the ground. But the whole band didn't worry. He comes straight charging through, just like he always did. Didn't even stop to arrange his troops. But for that morning, for little band, hell came to breakfast. My sharp-shooting militia boys opened up on them with a defile angle, and boy, was that murderous effect. But the Brits kept on coming, and then those Kentucky Deadeyes and half them Continentals opened up on them again. Boom! Even worse effect. But those Brits, they just kept coming right on, and meanwhile, I had told the boys in the middle to execute a wheelwright maneuver so they could protect my right flank against little Banny's mad dash. Well, for some reason, and to this day I do not know why, they began to march off the field in good order. Looked like a retreat. Well, that's what the Brits thought too. Well, I rode over as fast as I could with my horse, and I got them turned around, and I said, boys, look, just one more fire, and the day is ours. But here comes them Brits, because they thought they had broken the spirit of the cowardly colonials one more time. Well, as they went up that hill and they got to the top, they looked down in that depression, and all they saw were the muscles of my boys' muskets. Well, I shouted, "Fire!" And they did. Whew! What a hail of lead and sheet of flame, and that noise, well, those Brits rocked back. And then I said, give 'em the bayonet. And we did, and we went through them Brits like a bowling ball through dry corn stalks. Hell, most of those Brits, well, they just got down on their knees and they threw their little weapons down, and they were begging for mercy. And even little bloody Ban, he gave up and did a fair deal of running. We gave him a devil of a whipping that day. And then, when the last Brit that could move had surrendered, I rode my horse over those hills and I said, to God be the glory. Well, then I got the numbers. Yep. Out of 1,200 British soldiers, we had captured 500, 200 wounded, and more than 100 killed. And our casualties? Just 12 brave souls killed. That's right. Just 12. Well, that's some kind of miracle, I'd say. Yep. Tell you, boys.
Yes. In less than an hour, Morgan's men won a convincing victory over the British. Cowpens was a critical victory for the American cause. Coming on the heels of Kings Mountain, the victory was a turning point for the Revolution in the South and paved the way to American independence. In a sense, the road to Yorktown began at Cowpens.
By 1862, the tide began to turn for the Union in the American Civil War. President Lincoln had struggled with the idea of emancipating 4 million enslaved blacks, but initially feared backlash from Northern voters would cause him to lose the election of 1864, especially if the Confederacy continued to do well in battle against the Union. By September 1862, Lincoln felt he had the victories and the mandate to issue an Emancipation Proclamation that would go into effect on January 1, 1863, and the latter date is still celebrated in many black churches as Watch Night.
Let me share with you excerpts from a proclamation by Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States of America. Whereas on the 22nd day of September, in the year of our Lord, 1862, a proclamation was issued by the President of the United States, containing, among other things, the following, to wit: all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state shall be then thenceforward and forever free, and the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons, and will do no act or acts to repress such persons, or any of them, in any effort they may make for their actual freedom. And I hereby enjoin upon the people so declared to be free to abstain from all violence, unless in necessary self-defense. And I recommend to them that, in all cases when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. And I further declare and make known that such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed services of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service. And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice, warranted by the Constitution, upon military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God.
A decisive battle was fought during the Civil War at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The Union was victorious, losing 23,000 troops to the Confederate loss of 28,000. 6 months later, on November the 19th, 1863, President Lincoln was asked to speak at a program to bury the troops. He struggled hard to find words that would unify the nation.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be here dedicated to the unfinished work which those who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to that great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that great cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
In September of 1838, a 20-year-old slave, Frederick Douglass, escaped from Maryland, never to return to his master. He became one of the greatest American statesmen and one of our most riveting orators as Christian abolitionist, journalist, author, and human rights advocate. His faith brought him through the nightmares of treatment and lifted him up to become also one of the most inspiring leaders against slavery worldwide. Please join us in 1872, when Mr. Douglass was on a lecture tour encouraging all Americans to achieve their highest potential.
And I found myself wielding the pen as well as my voice to send oppression to the grave. However, while back in America, my friends in Boston earnestly opposed. Wood Sawyer offering himself to the public as an editor, a slave, bored up in the very depth of ignorance, assuming to instruct the highly civilized people of the North in the principles of humanity, liberty, and justice. Nevertheless, I persevered. The newspaper flourished for 16 years, and I only closed it during the war and after a meeting with President Lincoln, under the belief that I was to be commissioned by the United States to be the first black officer. I was to be the assistant adjutant to General Thomas, who was then recruiting and organizing troops in the Mississippi Valley. My 3 sons were serving in that war, and after their splendid behavior and their ability to fight, to meet the foe in the open field, black soldiers on equal fitness with white soldiers to stop a bullet, black men had proved themselves to be courageous and worthy. In Romans, Paul the apostle says, "For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord." So that was American slavery. No marriage, no education, the light of the gospel shut out from slaves and forbidden by law to read and write. It was such a giant sin, so hardening to the heart, so destructive to the moral sense of everyone around it, that I feel abundantly justified to appeal to the whole world to aid in its removal wherever it be found. Slavery is a crime against God and against all human family, and it belongs to the entire human family to seek its suppression. I take my stand on behalf of all the oppressed and the enslaved of all colors and of all nations and of all the world over. Thou anointeth my head with oil, my cup runneth over. In a speech I delivered in November 1867, I said that a man's rights rest in 3 boxes: the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box.
Let no man be kept from the ballot box because of his color, and let no woman be kept from the ballot box because of her sex. But what does all of this amount to, this freedom? If the black man, after having been made free by the letter of the law, is still unable to exercise this freedom, the real question is, do they mean to make good to us all the promises made in that glorious liberty document, the U.S. Constitution? So, dear ones, we must always find place for courage and perseverance. I here leave the subject, and I leave it off where I began, consoling myself and congratulating all friends of freedom on the fact that the anti-slavery cause is not a new thing under the sun. It has appeared in all ages and summoned its advocates from all ranks. Its foundations are laid in the deepest and holiest of convictions. Old as the everlasting hills, immovable as the throne of God, and certain as the purposes of eternal power against all hindrances, and despite the mutation of human instrumentalities. It is the faith of my soul that this holy cause will triumph.
It is not the critic who counts. You've probably heard those words. They're pretty famous. You might have seen them on a poster. You might even have seen them in a meme on social media. They're from a speech that President Theodore Roosevelt delivered in Paris in 1910. It was entitled Citizenship in a Republic. To me, they have, of course, a political meaning, but also a very personal meaning. When I was a senior in high school, I was the quarterback of a football team that was ranked #1 in the entire state of Indiana at the beginning of the year. It was the first year of the state playoff system, and everybody wanted us to win the state championship. Expectations were very high. Everybody thought we would win the state championship. We started off great. Won our first game 49-0. I threw a bunch of touchdown passes. But then we lost. I threw an interception in that game, the second game of the year, that was really pretty key to our kind of going into a spiral. We were way down in the third quarter, and even though I helped lead us back to almost win the game, we didn't win. We lost. And pretty much immediately after that, a storm of criticism descended. I heard it all around town. I heard it from strangers, people I didn't even know. My dad certainly heard it in the stands every game after that. And then I came across this speech by Theodore Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts. I immediately typed it up, taped it to the wall in my bedroom, and every day, especially if I was leaving for football practice, I would look at those words and try to take in their meaning, what they meant for me in my life. There are many men who feel a kind of twister pride in cynicism. There are many who confine themselves to criticism of the way others do what they themselves dare not even attempt. There is no more unhealthy being, no man less worthy of respect than he who either really holds or feigns to hold a sneering disbelief in all that is great and lofty, whether in achievement or in that noble effort which, even if it fails, comes to second achievement. A cynical habit of thought and speech, a readiness to criticize work which the critic himself never tries to perform, an intellectual aloofness that can't allow contact with life's realities. All these are marks not, as the possessor would feign to think, of superiority, but of weakness. The role is easy. There is none easier, save the role of the man who would sneer at criticism and performance alike. It is not the critic who counts. not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, for there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who, at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. My team lost another game that year. We ended the year with an 8-2 record. We won our conference handily, and we ended the year ranked 5th in the state. But throughout our town, my little town of 45,000 people in Indiana, our season was widely considered to be a failure. It was a painful experience that stuck with me ever since. But I was able to console myself by thinking about Roosevelt's words, that my teammates and I actually were the men in the arena, our faces marred by dust and sweat and blood. Maybe we hadn't been what a lot of people would have thought was a success, but we had dared greatly, even though we'd come up short. I've just tried to remember Roosevelt's words ever since, and let them remind me to take risks, to come back from failure, and to accept criticism with dignity.
Not long after President Roosevelt's visit to Paris, Europe was engulfed in a tragic war, leading to devastation worldwide, including the United States. However, one bright outcome at the end was the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, granting American women voting rights. Then, by 1938, another global conflict, began by totalitarian governments, created the Holocaust in Europe and in Soviet Russia, some of the most horrifying destruction of life known in world history. Heroes, men and women, who rose up in these deadly wars, displaying courage and great bravery, cannot be measured. We hope to bring you some of them in the future. However, by the 1950s, the nations of the world were rebuilding. We will close this program with two individuals who exemplify overcoming against great odds, moving from darkness into light.
Alone in a world without light or sound, the toddler Helen Keller raged against the darkness of a world she could not understand. At age 2, illness had left the child blind and deaf. A remarkable teacher, though, the partially blind Anne Sullivan, finally reached that angry child. The two women pooled their resources, leaned on their faith, and overcame great adversity. The teacher became Keller's lifelong companion and friend. And as a result of this relationship, Keller became a noted author and spokesperson for individuals with disabilities, women's suffrage, and workers' rights. In 1904, Keller became the first blind and deaf individual to earn a college degree in the U.S. In 1955, Harvard University honored Keller's extraordinary career with an honorary degree, which she accepted with the aid of her interpreter, Polly Thompson.
A more moving event could not have happened to me.
A more moving event could not have happened to me
Than a generous sign of recognition from Harvard University.
Than the generous sign of recognition from Harvard University.
Of one who was once entombed in the silent dark.
Of one who was once entombed in the silent dark.
My thanks cannot be measured by words, but in a warm regard which the university had already had in my heart.
My thanks cannot be measured in words, but in the warm regard which the university has always had in my heart.
As an inspirer of great scholarship and lives consecrated by the love of freedom.
As an inspirer of great scholarship and lives consecrated by the love of freedom.
While in India, I saw the banyan tree, which resembles my life.
While in India, I saw the banyan tree, which resembles my life.
Facing drought and other calamities of weather.
Facing drought and other inclemencies of weather.
Yet find ways to send little shoots from its extremities.
Yet finds ways to send out little shoots from its extremities.
And they make roots and send out on branches and leaves and flowers and fruit like the parent tree.
And they put out branches, leaves, flowers, and fruit like the parent tree.
My teacher's individuality was like a banyan.
My teacher's individuality was like the banyan.
Her work for my development seemed to have no root or seed in human experience.
Her work for my development seemed to have no root or seed in the human experience.
Yet with faith and courage, she created me as a little shoot.
Yet with faith and courage, she created me as a little shoot.
Which she trusted would fall into soil.
Which she trusted would fall into good soil.
And shape itself under her watchful eye as a normal human being.
And shape itself under her watchful eye as a normal human being.
This thought fills me with a fresh sense of spiritual resources with the rest of life.
This thought thrills me with a fresh sense of spiritual resources which she exemplified.
And which have the power to reorganize life in unexpected form.
And which have the power to reorganize life in unexpected forms.
Wise statements tie to situations in other countries, not their own.
Wise statesmen study the true situation in other countries beside their own.
So they may serve this purpose.
To more fully serve this purpose.
America should be at the vanguard.
America should be in the vanguard.
Planting banyans of enlightened understanding.
Planting banyans of enlightened understanding.
Of other people's history and revolution.
Of other people's history and evolution.
Their manner of living and chances of future well-being.
Their manner of living and chances of future well-being.
Only through the meeting of minds and hearts everywhere.
Only through the meeting of minds and hearts everywhere.
Can the earth be blessed with true civilization.
Can the earth be blessed with true civilization.
And the sun of its peace.
And the sun of its peace.
On April the 4th, 1968, then presidential candidate Senator Robert F. Kennedy was to speak to a predominantly black neighborhood in Indianapolis, Indiana. Word had begun to spread around the country. The great human rights leader Martin Luther King was assassinated, leading to riots in many cities. City authorities told Senator Kennedy to cancel the speech, and when he refused, they denied him police protection. However, his words brought peace and calm to the occasion, and his message of healing has much to say for any era. It is ironic that he also was assassinated only 2 months later.
I have bad news for you, for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and killed tonight. Martin Luther King dedicated his love and his life to the justice for his fellow human beings, and he died because of that effort. In this difficult day, and in this difficult time of the United States, it is perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence, there evidently is that there were white people who were responsible. You can be filled with bitterness, with hatred, and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country in great polarization. Black people amongst black, white people amongst white, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and to replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that has spread across our land, with an effort to understand with compassion and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and distrust at the injustice of such an act, I can say that in my own heart, I have that same feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. We have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand and to go beyond these difficult times. My favorite poet was Aeschylus. He wrote, "In our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart until, in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. So I shall ask you tonight to return home, to say a prayer for the family of Martin Luther King. That's true. But more importantly, to say a prayer for our nation and our country, which all of us love. A prayer for understanding and that compassion of which I spoke. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've always had difficult times in the past. We've had difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness. It is not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings who reside in our land. Let us dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago: to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people.
We are so glad you have been able to be with us on the journey in U.S. history. And I wish to thank our actors and scholars, as well as offering gratitude to the South Carolina Humanities, the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, and our generous donors for making this program possible.